Chapter 3 10 Laws of Boundaries. Like the alien visitor from another planet described at the beginning of the chapter, people raised in dysfunctional families or families where God's ways of boundaries are not practiced find themselves lost, confused, and easily hurt in adult life. They don't understand the spiritual principles that govern relationships and personal well being. These principles, the spiritual realities that God built into the world He created, have never been explained to them. So they become prisoners of their own ignorance. We need to know these principles and operate according to them. In this lesson, we'll look at 10 laws of boundaries that, once learned, can help you begin to experience life differently. Page 85 to 86. Law 1. The law of sowing and reaping. The law of cause and effect is a basic law of life. The Bible calls it the law of sowing and reaping. When God tells us that we will reap what we sow, He is not punishing us. He's telling us how things really are. Page 86. In Galatians 6, verse 7 through 8, what does Paul teach about sowing and reaping? What, if anything, have you sown to your own flesh, overeating, acting out, overspending, selfishness, ignoring of God's commandments, etc.? And what did you reap as a result? What positive seeds, eating right, exercising regularly, budgeting wisely, etc., have you sown in your life? And what are you reaping as a result? Sometimes, however, we don't reap what we sow because someone steps in and reaps the consequences for us. The law of sowing and reaping can be interrupted, and it is often people who have no boundaries who do the interrupting. Boundaries force the person who is doing the sowing to also do the reaping. Page 87. When has someone stepped in and rescued you from the consequences of your actions? When have you been the rescuer? When did you step in? Today we call a person who continually rescues another person a codependent. Often such a person will confront the irresponsible person. Page 87. When have you tried to confront the person you've rescued about his or her irresponsible behavior? What resulted from the confrontation? When has a rescuer confronted you about your behavior? What changes did you make as a result of that decision? As your answers to the preceding two questions probably reveal, confronting an irresponsible person is not painful to him. Only consequences are. In fact, the Bible tells us it is worthless to confront foolish people. Proverbs 9, verse 8. And people caught in destructive patterns are usually more foolish than wise. Page 88. When have you seen the consequences prompt someone to make important changes in his or her life? When have consequences for your actions prompted you to make changes in your own life? Codependent people bring insults and pain unto themselves when they confront irresponsible people. In reality, they just need to stop interrupting the law of sowing and reaping. Page 88. Where do you need to stop interrupting the law of sowing and reaping in someone's life? Law 2. The law of responsibility. People react in various ways to a talk on boundaries and taking responsibility for their own lives. Some respond with, "That's so self centered. We should love one another and deny ourselves." Other people set out on a selfish and self centered life, and still others begin to feel guilty when they do someone else a favor. Page 88 to 89. Which of these unbiblical views of responsibility reflect your intentional response to the idea of boundaries? The law of responsibility includes loving others. In fact, the commandment to love is the entire law of Christians. Galatians 5 verses 13 through 14. Anytime you are not loving others, you are not taking responsibility for yourself. You have disowned your heart. Page 88. What does Jesus teach in John 15, verse 12? Problems arise when boundaries of responsibility are confused. We are to love one another, to be one another. We can't, for instance, grow for one another. Page 88. What biblical mandate for personal growth do you find in Philippians 2 verses 12 through 13? What are you doing to take responsibility for your personal and spiritual growth? Where are you trying to take responsibility for someone else's personal and spiritual growth? The Bible teaches that we are to treat others the way we want to be treated. Matthew 7, verses 12, page 88. How do our boundaries enable us to respond to this teaching? In light of Matthew 7, verse 12, how are we to respond to people whose boundaries aren't well defined? Another aspect of being responsible to someone is setting limits on that person's destructive and irresponsible behavior. When you rescue someone from the consequences of their sin, you'll only have to do so again. Proverbs 19, verse 19. Throughout its pages, the Bible stresses that you are to give to needs and put limits on sin. Proverbs 23, verses 13 to 14. Boundaries help you do just that. Page 89. Where have you seen this truth evident in real life? When have you been hurt or hurt someone else because limits were not put on behavior? Law 3. The law of power. Which, if any, of the following questions have you asked yourself? Am I powerless over my behavior? If I am, how can I become responsible? What do I have the power to do? Understanding the law of power will help you answer these questions. We are powerless over our addictions. Page 89 to 91. Read through what Paul says in Romans 7, verses 15 through 23. What phrases can you especially identify with? What specific struggles do the phrases you listed bring to mind? Both the Bible and the 12-step program teach that people must admit that they are moral failures. The law of sin is at work within us, and we lie when we deny that fact. 1 John 1, verse 8, page 89. Though you do not have the power in and of yourself to overcome your sinful patterns, you do have the power to do some things that will bring fruit of victory later. Pages 89 through 91. You have the power to agree with the truth about your problems, confession. 2. You have the power to submit your inability to God and turn your life over to Him. The doctor who can do what you are unable to do, bring about change. Matthew 5, verses 3, 6, James 4, verses 7 through 10, 1 John 1, verse 9. You have the power to ask God and others to reveal more and more about what is within your boundaries. 4. You have the power to turn from the evil that you find within you, repentance. 5. You have the power to humble yourself and ask God and others to help you with your developmental injuries and leftover childhood needs. 6. You have the power to seek out those whom you have injured and make amends. 7. You have the power to forgive those who have hurt you. Which powers listed surprise you, encourage you, intimidate you? Which powers do you need to begin exercising in your life? What is the first step you will take to exercise one of the powers you just listed? Whom will you ask to help you? Besides clarifying what you do have power over, boundaries help define what you do not have power over. Everything outside of them. You can work on submitting yourself to the process of clarifying your boundaries and on working with God to change them, to change you. You cannot change anything else. Not the weather, the past, the economy, and especially not other people. Page 90 to 91. What sources of worry are outside your boundaries? Whom have you been trying to change? What can you do to positively influence those people instead of trying to change them? And what can you do to change yourself, specifically? Your ways of dealing with them so that their destructive patterns no longer work on you. You need the wisdom to know what is you and what is not you. Pray for the wisdom to know the difference between what you have the power to change and what you do not. Make the serenity prayer your own. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Page 91. Law 4. The law of respect. When we think about setting boundaries and trying to live by them, we fear that others will respect them, not respect them. We focus on others and lose clarity about ourselves. Page 91. Sometimes the problem is not we judge other people's boundaries. The Bible says whenever we judge, we will be judged. Matthew 7, 1 to 2. When we judge others' boundaries, our will falls under the same judgment. If we condemn others' boundaries, we can expect them to condemn ours. Page 92. Review the list of comments at the bottom of page 91. Which kinds of thoughts, judgments have you had about other people's boundaries? Why does this perspective on other people's boundaries make it difficult to set your own? With whom have you been caught up in this fear cycle and therefore been afraid to set the boundaries you need to set? With whom do you comply rather than set boundaries? This is where the law of respect comes in. Page 92. Again, what does Jesus teach in Matthew 7, verse 12? What does this teaching mean for boundaries? We need to respect the boundaries of others in order to earn respect for our own. We need to treat their boundaries the way they want them to treat ours. Page 92. Whose boundaries do you need to have more respect for? To whom do you need to, in the Spirit of Jesus, grant the freedom to be himself or herself and different from you? 2 Corinthians 3, verse 17. When we accept other people's freedom, we don't get angry, feel guilty, or withdraw our love. When they set boundaries with us, we accept others' freedom. We are also free. Page 92. Law 5. The law of motivation. Review Stan's story on page 92 and 93. Where do you see yourself in Stan in his actions, his ideas, and his motivations? Is some of your doing and sacrificing motivated not by love, but by fear that you won't be loved if you don't comply? If so, what life experiences taught you that love will be removed if you don't do what someone wants? Is some of your doing motivated by the fear of anger? Again, what life experiences taught you that saying no will lead to angry confrontations? Besides the fear that we will lose love, and the fear that people will be angry with us, others' false motives keep us from setting boundaries. Page 93 to 94. Which of the following false motives have been behind some of your actions? Fear of loneliness, thinking that to love means always to say yes. Thinking that good people always say yes. Trying to overcome the guilt inside you feel good about yourself. Paying back all that you've received. Trying to gain people's approval, especially from those who represent parents whose approval was withheld. Over-identifying with the other person's loss and feeling the sadness you think your no would cause them. What life experiences and early relationships helped engender these false motives? We are all called into freedom, and this freedom results in gratitude, an overflowing heart, and love for others. God calls us to love one another, and love is the only true motive for what we do. Page 94. When have you experienced that is truly, when have you experienced that is more blessed to give than to receive. Acts 20, verse 35. Be specific about the circumstances and your feelings. In general, do you experience gratitude, an overflowing heart, and love for others when you say yes to requests? If not, what kind of emotions do you feel instead? If your giving is not leading to cheer, you need to examine the law of motivation, a law that says freedom first, service second. If you serve to get free of your fear, you are doomed to failure. Let God work on the fears, resolve them, and create some healthy boundaries to guard the freedom you were called to. Page 94.